Hello everyone, welcome back to melaw.ca's YouTube channel, your go-to source for legal insights on legal matters. I'm your host, founder, and principal lawyer of melaw, and today we're going to be diving into the truth about real estate litigation and what it means to investors. Real estate litigation can be a complex and challenging process with significant implications for investors. For example, investors can lose their money. So, if a condo project fails in a development, you could be out your money. That's the reality of it. You guys need to understand that real estate litigation not only involves issues for investors, but it also involves disputes related to property ownership, purchase and sale contracts, lease agreements, zoning issues, construction defects, title issues, easement issues, and other property-related disputes. Litigation can arise between property owners, tenants, developers, contractors, government entities, and so on. Now, we're going to look at a couple of areas where are common in real estate litigation. For example, the first area I want to discuss is a breach of contract. You can have disputes arise from alleged breaches of contracts and for purchase and sale. And the majority of those breaches arise for failing to close. For example, I'm going to tell you about two different kinds of contracts first. First, you have the resale home purchase contract. Sometimes it's a couple pages long, and it has terms that are negotiated between real estate agents in terms of what you're going to buy. So, for example, if you want to do inspections of your home, you can put in an inspection clause, of the home you want to purchase. If you want to do it to be subject to financing, you need to put a finance clause. And I recommend that you do put a finance clause because most of these fail to close agreements on a resale home happen because the individual who's buying the home can't secure financing. So those clauses are really, really important. Then the other hand on that is that you have to understand that if you're negotiating the contract with the seller and your buyer, sometimes the seller will basically refuse certain clauses in the contract. So, for example, they might list the house or want to sell the house whereas is. For example, you're buying it just the way the house is. So if there's any cracks in the foundation and so forth, you're buying the house the way it is. And sometimes people who intend on renovating or redeveloping that plot will buy a house the way it is. So they don't force the sellers to fix it. So they know that beforehand. So they know that any deficits with the property, they already know that beforehand. Then you also have issues with some sellers. If they're going to sell the property to you, they don't want finance clauses included. So they don't want the agreement to be subject to you obtaining financing. Now you have to understand that if you don't obtain financing, there's a risk that if the contract doesn't close, that you're going to be sued for your deposit. So that means any amount of money you put down on the property and any damages as a result of that not closing. So for example, a change in sale price. So you might have put an offer on a high price of the property on a resale. It comes back that the house is sold, let's say $100,000, $200,000 less. So they're going to sue you for that $200,000. Then they're also going to sue you for example, any additional mortgages and upkeep they had to pay for the property. They can include that in their claim against you. Now, the courts have also been involved a lot. The courts are involved in a lot of these, and people take these matters to court. And the court's been clear that, listen, like, you've entered this contract, you know the terms. You should have, been able to, understand what terms you want, what terms you don't want, and understand the repercussions of not including those terms. So if you do think about purchasing a property as a buyer, it's important that you actually get somebody on a resale home maybe you visit a lawyer in the process of having your agreement drawn up, because real estate agents, sometimes they don't tell you everything unless, they know a lawyer, they call up and ask questions. But it's important that you get a lawyer to review the contract so you understand your rights. Now, the other side of it is the seller can also back out of the contract, and there's also an avenue for the buyer to take to basically have the contract, what we call as specific performance. So have the contract actually go through, and there's a specific requirement you have to meet and so forth. Now that is what I just spoke about resale homes. There's also various things. For example, if different things that could go to the breaches of contract in terms of not only being able to close, but certain things. Let's say you were told something by the seller and you were led to believe that, and it turns out something else. Then there's an avenue for you to take on that. So when you get your resale contract, there's a lot of clauses and terms, and you need to look at those carefully. You're entitled to do what's called a title search. So you go and you search the title, the root of the title of the property, and so forth. And your solicitor can do that because you have a specific amount of time of asking for certain things to be done. If certain things aren't done, that could be a recourse for you to kind of back out of the contract. But that is also something that your lawyer should explain to you, and ways you could do that. Now, it's also important that the real estate agent also works on your behalf to make sure that certain things are done. For example, ensuring that appliances are working and so forth. Talking with the other side in terms of negotiating a holdback if necessary for working appliances. That's really the job of your real estate agent, and the lawyer, solicitor who does all that stuff relies on the contract. So those things have to be put in the contract. Okay, so that is a resale issues with, for example, you could find yourself in breach of contract for failing to close on a resale. Now, it's the same thing with pre-construction. So with pre-construction contracts, those are a lot more detailed, and you're always given time to review those with a lawyer. So you need to understand that the financing is always the case when it comes to contracts not proceeding and litigation arising out of that. It's the same thing. You don't have the money to close, they have to put it up for sale, they could sue for those damages, okay, for the difference in price. So understand that is the way that they can move forward. Now, there are some builders who can give you some time if the builder understands that they've been delayed, or there's issues with the way the property is built and so forth in terms of zoning and all that stuff. You can come out of that if that's available to you. So it's really important that when you go to a solicitor to review those contracts, you know that if that's available. If it's not, it could be your solicitor going to negotiate those terms for you. I've seen contracts where people were very close to close on a pre-construction, and they were given the ability to basically say up to after a certain date to leave that contract, even though it's so far into the building, so into its actual development. So you need to look at that and look at and see how that can assist you. Now, you also not only is it the breaches of contract, but you also can run into issues with lease agreements. Okay, so there could be disputes on the lease agreements, and there could be disputes on construction contracts. So all of that falls into real estate litigation and or construction litigation, depending on what it is that your issue involves, right? So you have to really be able to speak to lawyers and determine where your issue falls. Now, it's also important that you understand that you have the breach of contract, as I explained, as a litigation issue. You have then property disputes, okay? Property disputes involves boundary disputes in terms of are you on the property survey lines? And a lot of people fight over the fence not being in the right area. You have easement issues. Do you have a right to that easement? Some zoning cities require you to have access to an easement that runs, let's say, for example, as part of your survey if you intend to redevelop the land. So it's important that you understand whether you have those easements, and sometimes you have to go and bring an application for the court to grant you an easement if the other side, the other party doesn't give you access to that easement. You also have title issues, as I explained, like you have issues with title and disagreements over property rights, which are common causes of litigation. For example, you can have issues that arise over who actually owns the property. And what I mean by issues in title, let's say, for example, there's liens on title. So those things have to be cleared, because if someone is putting a lien on the potential purchase of a property or has placed a lien, you need to litigate that, because that affects your title. So you don't have good title if there's a lien on it. Okay? Then you move away from that and you look at the landlord and tenant disputes. Now, disputes over rent, lease terms, property maintenance, eviction process, these all can lead to litigation. These matters are often dealt with the landlord and tenant board. However, there are specific landlord-tenant disputes that can make their way out of the landlord and tenant board and into the Superior Court of Justice. So, usually, for example, a lawyer like me, we don't deal with landlord and tenant disputes at the landlord and tenant board, because it's only up to $35,000 in terms of the amount of money, and it's almost like a small claims court, I would say. So we try not to take on those cases, because obviously at a firm of our caliber, it could be pretty pricey, right? So we don't usually take on those type of disputes. We do tell our clients to reach out to a paralegal that deals with those disputes. And also the government website on this specific area has a lot of guidance and information as to what you can do if you have to go in front of a landlord and tenant tribunal. In terms of outside the landlord and tenant tribunal, we obviously assist clients with that. We've taken a few cases where landlords have to deal with damage to their property and the costs associated with that, that take it outside of the landlord and tenant board. So yes, there are matters that go to the Supreme Court of Justice on that issue. Now, another area that we deal with that often arises in real estate litigation is construction defects, right? So investors can often be found may face litigation over alleged construction defects, delays, or cost overruns, right? So it's important that you, as an investor, you understand that it's great to do this type of stuff. It's great to invest in new developments. It's great to put in your money and be part of this process and have, a significant return on your investment. But at the same time, there's always risks to that. So it's important that you understand that the risks are there. For example, there could be a delay, right, in the construction. Again, it could be costly. Like in Toronto, one of the biggest construction projects now, basically is facing financial difficulties and have been through the courts, and so forth, and they're almost on the verge of bankruptcy. So it's important that you understand that could happen, and huge investors in that case need protection in terms of the money they've invested in these projects. Now, other real estate litigations issues that you could face is zoning and land use disputes. Challenges to zoning regulations, land use and restrictions, or development permits, which can all result in litigation. So it's important to understand that the cities that offer these zoning documents and permits and so forth, they can be very slow and they could be sometimes very difficult to work with. So it's important that you obviously go to a lawyer. First of all, when you're doing this paperwork to put together, you go to a lawyer and the lawyer does it for you and understands the process and has experience putting these things together for you. Because at the end of the day, some of these lawyers that do these for developers, they have a relationship with some of these individuals in the city, right? And I think that that's important because there's a lot of issues that some developers face with the city. For example, they promise them that they could develop on certain pieces of land, then they change their mind and that land is just sitting there and can't be developed. So it's really important that when you get started with developing, and as an investor you ask these questions, that it's not going to be a difficult process for a developer, and it's easier for you to understand that, listen, it might take time, but the developer has given you the assurance that it's taken care of. Now, I want to turn to look at really the impact this can have on investors. Now, real estate litigation can have a huge financial impact on investors, including legal fees, court costs, and potential damages for settlements, right? Litigation can also disrupt investment plans, delay projects, and damage investor reputation. Depending on the outcome, investors may face financial losses, restriction on property use, or forced property sales. It is important that an investor, you seek your legal advice before entering into any sort of agreements related to real estate. Now, I touched base already on this. It happens to always be in the news, right? Developer facing financial crisis, investors are at loss of, their deposits and then some, right? So it's important that you understand that as an investor, it isn't just a risk for you that you might not be able to close, for example, on your real estate deals for pre-construction, but that the developer themselves can face financial crisis and can put the development at risk. Now, what are the mitigating factors that you can do to mitigate the risks? And the way the investors can do that is by conducting their thorough due diligence before investing, including doing their own property inspections, for example, title searches, and legal review of contracts if you're doing the purchase of a resale. And again, as I touched base, you need to ask these questions on a project that's developing, whether they're, the rezoning applications and so forth. A lot of these banks that are funding some of these developments will also be asking these sort of questions and looking for doing their due diligence before providing any sort of financing. You also need to see whether they have insurance and what kind of insurance does the developer have to cover you as an investor, because you got to look to see that there are priorities in terms of who's paid out. So what do I mean by doing your due diligence? What I mean by that is you need to maintain clear and accurate records. You need to comply with legal and regulatory requirements and seek legal advice when necessary, which can help you prevent any legal disputes. And you need to understand that I was mentioning that you need to ask questions throughout the entire process. So every single time a project is being done, for example, on a new build, you need to ask questions throughout that project. Okay? You also need to ensure that there are dispute resolutions mechanisms attached to any of these contracts and agreements, and when they come into play, such as is it going to be in the beginning of the development? Is it going to be throughout? So you need to make sure and ensure that you understand how that dispute resolution mechanism works. And these include things like arbitration and mediation clauses in contracts, and those will be able to be provided in those contracts by the attorneys and lawyers by the lawyers putting those contracts together. In the event of litigation, investors should seek legal advice from a firm that's experienced with real estate litigation. And if there are specific issues dealing with specifically with construction issues, to understand your legal rights and your options, right? So you have to understand that construction litigation is, you could look at it as a big scheme, right? So real estate litigation is huge, right? And then construction litigation is its own animal, right? So if you have issues in the construction project, you obviously want to go to somebody who can actually give you advice on construction issues related to the project. I also encourage investors to actively participate in the litigation process if your matter is to go to litigation. You need to provide the necessary information and cooperate with all legal counsel to achieve a favorable outcome. Consideration should be given to settlement, negotiations, and alternative dispute resolution methods to avoid the costs and unnecessary uncertainties of trial. Okay? Because remember, a trial it's public. Everyone's exposed. And sometimes it's better to handle everything outside of the courtroom. Despite the risks, real estate investment can still be a lucrative venture. With careful planning, risk management, and legal guidance, you can come out on top as an investor. And I'm talking about, you can make good money in investing, right? But you should adopt a long-term perspective. You need to understand that occasional litigation risks are inherent in real estate investments and can be managed with the right strategies in place. In conclusion, real estate litigation is a complex and multifaceted process that can have significant implications for investors. By understanding the nature of real estate disputes, taking proactive steps and measures to mitigate the risks, and seeking legal advice when necessary, investors can navigate the challenges of real estate litigation and protect their investments. Remember, today's information isn't legal advice. If you need personalized guidance, reach out to us at 416-606-5405 or by email at office@melaw.ca. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the likes. If you hit the subscribe button, you'll be able to see all of our insightful content that comes out on a weekly basis. We appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you in our next video. Until then, take care.